Harper with the BBC News. Dramatic video evidence of last month's storming of the US Congress by supporters of Donald Trump has been played to senators at his second impeachment trial. They also heard recordings of panicked radio messages between police as they were overwhelmed. Democrats presenting the case to convict Mr. Trump accused him of cultivating, praising and channeling violence. The Democratic congressman Joaquin Castro said that in their early stages of the attack, Mr. Trump made no attempt to instruct the rioters to end their assault.
When the violence started, he never once said the one thing everyone around him was begging him to say: stop the attack. He refused to stop it.
The former president's lawyers say he bears no responsibility for the attack on the Capitol building. A United Nations envoy has condemned the reported arrest in Myanmar of one of Aung San Suu Kyi's most senior advisers as demonstrations continue following last week's coup. According to Ms Suu Kyi's party, Chaw Tee Sway and 4 others were taken from their homes. The UN Special Rapporteur Tom Andrews described the move as deeply troubling.
This is going to steal the resolve of the international community even more. They are simply not going to get away with this, and it's just an outrage. I have heard not only of government officials, political officials, leaders being arrested, but I'm getting calls literally this evening about people, regular people in Myanmar, being arrested today.
President Biden has spoken to China's leader Xi Jinping for the first time since taking office last month. The White House said Mr. Biden expressed concern over the extension of Beijing's control in Hong Kong and the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. They also exchanged views on climate change and nuclear proliferation. Relations between the world's 2 largest economies are at historically low levels. The last time their leaders spoke directly was in March last year. Japanese media say the head of the Tokyo Olympics Committee is to resign after being widely criticised for making sexist remarks. Reports say Yoshiro Mori will offer to step down at a special committee meeting on Friday. With more, here's Will Leonardo.
There's been growing anger in Japan and abroad after Yoshiro Mori complained last week that women spoke too much in meetings and were annoying. Hundreds of Olympic volunteers have resigned and major sponsors have voiced criticism. Tokyo's female mayor, Yuriko Koike, refused to attend a meeting with Mr. Mori, an 83-year-old former Japanese prime minister. The scandal, barely 5 months before the opening ceremony, is the latest hurdle for the organising committee, already facing questions about the feasibility of holding the Games during the pandemic. Public opinion in Japan has hardened against hosting the Olympics this year.
World News from the BBC. A new report has set out the scale of the economic problem facing oil and gas producing countries if the world meets internationally agreed targets to limit global warming. A London think tank called Carbon Tracker says dozens of governments, mainly in the Middle East and Africa, face total losses of $9 trillion in the next 2 decades. Scientists say global emissions of chemicals that harm the Earth's protective ozone layer are once again falling after a surge traced to factories in China. CFC chemicals that cause the depletion of ozone were banned worldwide in 2010. Our science correspondent Victoria Gill has the details.
It was back in 2018 when scientists first published a strange and worrying discovery about ozone-depleting chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, in the atmosphere. The researchers' atmospheric measurements picked up a new source of CFC emissions that they managed to pin down to East China. Detective work by China's Environmental Investigation Agency and by environmental journalists found that the chemical was being used in insulation foam that was being produced by companies in that region. This new study reveals that through this combination of atmospheric chemistry, investigative journalism, and enforcement of the global treaty that banned CFC production, those emissions have been stopped.
In tennis, the defending women's singles champion, Sophia Kenin, has been knocked out of the Australian Open. The American was beaten in straight sets by Kaia Kanepi from Estonia. Kenin said she'd been troubled by an injury, which she said might have been linked to the mandatory 2-week coronavirus quarantine on arrival in Australia. Archaeologists have managed to produce near-perfect notes from a conch shell that was used as a musical instrument more than 17,000 years ago. The shell was found in a hunter-gatherer cave in southern France in 1931, but was assumed to be a drinking cup. After decades in a museum, researchers at Toulouse University re-examined the artefact. BBC News.